Good evening, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And tonight, we're bringing the first half of Chapter 14, Forging the National Economy, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, start us off.
Okay, so the American people overall were young and restless, constantly pushing farther and farther west. However, life was not pleasant for most of these pioneer families. Often there was little food and inadequate housing. Women suffered from loneliness and sometimes broke down into madness. Overall, American pioneers were provincial, individualistic, and superstitious, so it is no surprise that Emerson's essay Self-Reliance was well received. Now, Frank, can you tell me how these pioneers affected the Western landscape?
Absolutely. So, Western movement molded the environment. Growing tobacco had exhausted the soil, continually forcing farmers to move on. Settlers trapped and hunted beaver and bison almost to extinction, and they sold the furs to for manufactured good as part of the rendezvous system. This system encouraged and rewarded aggressive hunting, leading to what would be dubbed as ecological imperialism. The continued settlement and exploration of America fostered appreciation of American wilderness. Some, like artist George Catlin, argued for national parks to preserve this beauty, eventually achieving it with Yellowstone National Park in 1873. Abe, can you extrapolate on the causes and effects of America's increased population?
Yeah, so America's population continued to grow, and the U.S. became the fourth most populous nation in the Western world. Urban growth also came hand in hand. For example, New Orleans became the Queen of the South. However, with urban growth came poor living conditions with foul sewage, impure water, and smelly slums. Overall, the increase in population was mostly due to a high birth rate, but increased immigration also contributed. Immigrants seemed to be running out of room in Europe and saw America as the land of freedom and opportunity. In America, there was also no aristocratic caste and more opportunity to own land. Lastly, the new steamships allowed immigrants to travel more speedily and cheaply. The U.S. overall had a much more diverse array of immigrants in race than any other country. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the Irish immigrants specifically?
Yeah. The Irish potato famine in the mid-1840s drastically increased Irish immigration to the U.S. Most flocked to the big East Coast cities like New York, taking low-wage jobs such as manual laborers on the train tracks or aides in the kitchen. They were widely disliked by Protestant Americans for their Catholicism, leading to job discrimination and signs saying, "No Irish need apply," or Nina. Indeed, the Irish competed with blacks for the lowest paying jobs throughout America. The Ancient Order of Hibernians was created in 1836 to help Irish immigrants. It helped found the Molly Maguires, a coal miners' union, a few decades later. The Irish quickly began to fill positions of power in politics and police, most famously in New York's Tammany Hall. Once in power, some used their positions to ferment profit for themselves and for their friends through corruption.
Bitte, Abe, tell me about the German 48ers, yeah?
Okay, so most of the German immigrants were uprooted farmers, but still many were liberal political refugees searching for democracy. German liberals like Karl Schurz eventually helped to elevate American political life. Unlike the Irish, who settled in the coastal cities, Germans made their home in the Middle West. Since they were more scattered, they weren't as politically potent as the Irish, however. As a whole, the Germans supported public schools, stimulated art and music, and became enemies of slavery. The Germans, however, were sometimes resented when they formed compact colonies in order to isolate themselves and preserve their culture. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the beginnings of anti-foreignism in the U.S.?
Yeah, so the growing power of immigrants, especially the Irish and Germans, alarmed nativists, or Americans who disliked the culture or religion of these immigrants. In fact, Catholicism continued to grow along with immigrations in the 40s and the 50s, leading to nativists creating the Know Nothing Party. This party was so called because of their go-to response in the case of any inquiries, which was, "I know nothing." They wanted heavy restrictions on immigration and occasionally even launched attacks against Catholic churches, such as when they burned a Catholic church in Boston in 1834. However, they slowly began to fade as Americans as a whole realized how critical immigrants were to fueling the American economy and American economic expansion. Abe, can you inform me how America first began to industrialize?
Yes. The factory system and the Industrial Revolution, in fact, began in Britain and gradually spread to the US. But why was America so slow to embrace the machine? 1. Labor was scarce, since many Americans were occupied with their own farms. 2. Investment money was scarce also, so materials were left undeveloped or undiscovered. 3. America had to compete with high-quality, cheaply priced British goods. And 4. Americans lacked designs for machinery, since the British passed laws forbidding the export of machines and the immigration of mechanics. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the two most important developments in the American Industrial Revolution?
You know it, Abe. Samuel Slater was known as the father of the factory system because he memorized British cotton spinning machine designs before coming to Rhode Island. There, he was funded by a capitalist named Moses Brown to recreate the British machinery for the first time on American soil. But perhaps even more importantly, the real breakthrough came in 1793 when Eli Whitney built the first cotton gin, meant for separating cotton fiber from its seeds, 50 times quicker than if done by hand. This one innovation turned cotton into a profitable cash crop. Meanwhile, northern factories were churning out textiles profitable because of the ample supply of water power up north, with rapidly rushing rivers and fast-moving water. Abe, can you tell me about further developments in the Industrial Revolution?
Of course. The embargo, non-intercourse, and the War of 1812 pushed America to develop its first factories. Eventually, the ensuing surge in nationalism led to cries like, "Buy American" and "Wear American," favoring American goods over foreign goods. The factory system began to flourish and pioneer into new industries. Eli Whitney introduced the principle of interchangeable parts, in which each part of a product, such as a musket, is identical. This laid the basis for assembly line production. Furthermore, the principle ensured the North's military dominance over the South, since most of the factories were located in the North. Later, Elias Howe invented the sewing machine, which became the foundation of the clothing industry and drove many seamstresses from their private homes into factories. More and more inventions were patented with the newly formed Patent Office, and eventually the principle of limited liability was established. It permitted individual investors to risk no more than his own share of the company's stock. So many investment capital companies sprung up, such as the Boston Associates. Lastly, Samuel Morse revolutionized the communication industry with his talking wires that eventually spanned almost all of America. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the average life of a worker in the Industrial Revolution?
Absolutely. The rise of the factory system meant the decline of personal relationships between workers and their employers. Additionally, most benefits went to factory owners, be it the long hours, low wages, and lack of unions for the workers. High rates of child labor, many between the ages of 12 and 7, were prevalent throughout all factories at this time. And eventually, working conditions did begin to improve as workers fought for 10-hour workdays, fair wages, and safer conditions. By the 1830s, labor unions were forming, though hurt badly by the Panic of 1837, mentioned a while ago. In Commonwealth versus Hunt, the Massachusetts Supreme Court in 1842 allowed unions and legalized them, provided that their intentions were honorable, legal, and just. Abe, did women gain rights during this age of industrialization?
Yes. Originally, women wove cloth and spun yarn at home. However, new factories undermined these activities but also offered employment to women. A factory job would mean greater economic independence and would allow women to purchase the new manufactured goods. The factory girls worked 6 days a week and were paid only pittances, but factory jobs were still unusual for women in the 1800s. Catherine Beecher urged women to become teachers and was ultimately successful, and other women worked as servants or maids. Most working women were single, and when married, they left their jobs and devoted themselves to their motherly duties. But a cult of domesticity developed that glorified the homemaker's customary functions. There were also numerous changes in the normal family life in this time. 1. Love, instead of parental arrangement, determined the choice of spouse. And 2. Families gradually became smaller as the fertility rate with women began to fall and women had fewer children. And domestic feminism developed as women began to play a leading role in decisions to have fewer children. And 3. Families became more child-centered, since fewer children allowed parents to more effectively care for each child. Overall, the modern family was affectionate, small, and centered on children, and it allowed women to demonstrate their talents. Now, Frank, how would you characterize the agriculture in America at this time?
Well, known for raising corn and planting pigs, the Trans-Allegheny region of Ohio, India, and Illinois morphed into an agriculture powerhouse. Inventions such as John Deere's steel plow and Cyrus McCormick's reaper for grain harvest advanced large-scale agriculture and cash crop growth. Eventually, it was the North who was growing more food than the South because the South was so obsessed with cash crops such as cotton.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.
And comment if you have any questions. We'll catch you guys next time in part 2.